Welcome back to the Fuel Your Legacy podcast. Each week, we expose the faulty foundational mindsets of the past and rebuild a newer, stronger foundation essential in creating your meaningful legacy. We've got a lot of work to do, so let's get started. As much as you like this podcast, I'm certain that you're going to love the book that I just released on Amazon, Fuel Your Legacy, The 9 Pillars to Build a Meaningful Legacy. I wrote this to share with you the experiences that I had while I was identifying my identity, how I began to create my meaningful legacy, and how you can create yours. You're going to find this book on Kindle, Amazon, and as always on my website, samknickerbocker.com. Welcome back to the Fuel Your Legacy, and we have another fantastic guest coming in from just on the other side of Phoenix, actually, this time, which is phenomenal. I like meeting with people who are close. We're still doing it over Zoom because it's just a little bit easier sometimes. But I'm grateful that I got to meet him. We both were supposed to speak at the same event, and then I ended up missing that event, so we didn't end up meeting each other there, but still got connected on social media. And his story is just absolutely incredible. It's not something I've ever heard before. And specifically regarding the new focus of the podcast, as far as what questions do we need to ask ourselves to lead to a happier, healthier, more fulfilled way of being. When I heard his story in detail, I said, hey, I would love to have you on the podcast because I think it's something of worth. So today we have with us a fantastic gentleman named John Antonucci. And we were discussing if I was going to be able to remember his name, but I think I got it. Yes. It's a unique one, a little bit like mine, but super excited. And he's all over in the leadership development specifically, or really focuses in on the corporate leadership aspect and how to be a better leader in a corporate setting. But the nice thing about leadership is leadership principles are applicable in every form of leadership. So it's not just because you're maybe not in a corporate setting, you're definitely going to be riveted, held captive by this story. And also there's tons of lessons to learn along the way. So John, thanks so much for taking the time to share your story with us, and go for it. Enlighten the people.
Hey, it's a privilege to be here, Sam. I appreciate you inviting me onto your podcast. And, my story, it's both unique and it's not at the exact same time. It's not because we all have things that have just brought us to a place of growth. And my story is, I think it's unique because so many people go the opposite direction. So just a brief synopsis of kind of what I've gone through in my life. I grew up in a very sheltered environment, but an environment that was very, very conducive to success. I started my own business, the first one at 7 years old, mowing lawns and doing other yard work. And by the time I was 12, I was working in 5 different little areas in our small town and probably bringing in more money than any sane 12-year-old should. But it was right around that time where I also got into martial arts. And in martial arts, I quickly advanced. That was the first time that I stepped into a place of leadership, was when the instructor was stuck in traffic and the other parents of the class said to me, hey, we think you should teach. And I was like, oh, no, I can't. I'm not the highest rank. I'm not the oldest. No. And they were like, well, we're paying for the class and we asked you to teach. So go ahead and do that. And so I stepped in front of the class, and that was my first real leadership experience, terrified out of my mind. But we had a great class. And by the time I was 15, I was the assistant instructor. By the time I was 17, I had my own classes. And by the time I was 19, I had over 500 students across the Phoenix metro area that all called me sensei. And things were going well. Had my own place, my own vehicle, just from a very external perspective, all was well. The problem is that on an internal level, I was not nearly as successful as I was on an external level, and my character was not prepared for the amount of success that I'd had. And so at 19 years old, I made a decision that I will forever regret, and that is I went with some friends, and the bottom line, the sum of that story is that one of my best friend died. And I was charged with arson of an occupied structure and manslaughter. And my 19-year-old success came crashing down with a cataclysmic impact. And I went from being the golden boy and the model citizen to being on the 5 o'clock news for multiple days straight, and a 2020 episode. And not that I want any of your viewers to do this, but if you Google my name, you're going to see some really bad press from 2009, and it's still out there. And no matter how much good I do, that press will always be there. And please don't go look it up. Just take my word for it. It's not good. But that experience, while horrendous and horrible and just a terrible, terrible decision, caused me to say, wait a minute. What's wrong with me? Because this didn't happen because of somebody else. This is not anybody else's fault. This is not a broken system. This is not my friend's fault. This was me that made a decision. And so I had to do some real internal searching and find my own character flaws, a lack of integrity, a lack of courage, a lack of any of the things that you would want in a good leader. Despite the fact that I was in leadership positions, I wasn't functioning as a true leader. And so after doing some real soul searching and really identifying areas in my life that needed to change and addressing those areas, the natural capacity for leadership returned, and I was quickly put into more positions of leadership. And I'm thankful to say that I did much better after addressing those internal issues. And my legacy, if you will, within the Arizona Department of Corrections was to create, or having created a what they call the peer program. IPP stands for Inmate Peer Programming. And basically it is a huge rehabilitation and reentry success platform that is created by and for the inmate population. And so during the 12 years that I spent behind bars, I continued to work on myself, and I learned and I grew, but I also invested into others and tried to impact them in a positive way, and hopefully provided them with tools that they would need to be successful getting out. And if you talk to anybody that did time with me, or anybody that did time with me that watches this podcast, I'm 99.9% certain there would be nobody that has anything to say other than I improved the system. And if anybody disagrees, feel free to leave a comment on this podcast. But I think that's the legacy that I left, and I'm very humbled and honored to have been able to do that. And then, having gotten out of prison, I was able to continue that legacy, thankfully. And I've been serving as a training manager for a specialty logistics company. And within the last year, I have begun my own leadership development firm to try to empower those frontline and middle management leaders to effectively engage with their teams, so that organizations can experience improved employee retention and increased customer satisfaction. So that's kind of the short story of my journey from, ups and way down, and then back to kind of a place where I can hold my head high and say, hey, I'm making a positive impact and hopefully leaving a positive legacy on the world.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for going through it. We're going to go in some parts we're going to skim over it, but in some parts we're going to get into more of the details of the weeds, because I think it's important when it comes to what type of legacy you're leaving, and getting clear about the little things that make a big difference, and not just the little things that make a big difference externally, but the little things that make a big difference internally, the little things that allow us to justify our behavior for whatever reason that are essential for us to root out of our lives, to remove justification and be more clear about what our objectives are. So one thing that you mentioned is your first business at the age of 7. What was again, because part of this is understanding the questions that we're asking ourselves that drive this response. Because there's a lot of 7-year-olds who never have even the thought to build a business. They never have the need, right? They always have everything given to them. Their mom's still wiping their butt at 7 years old, still laying out their clothes. They don't have the drive or need for that. So what was the question, if you can remember back that far, that spurred on, hey, I'm going to go make money? Why did you do that?
I think a lot of it was a desire for independence. I grew up in we were a very poor household. My parents gave where it mattered. We had no end of love and support. Education was well established, but I'm the oldest of 5 and in a single income family. And so there wasn't money for extras. I don't know if this is a detail anybody wants, but I still vividly remember my father telling me that I could not have regular boxers until I could afford to pay the difference between what it cost him for the regular, tidy whities or whatever, as opposed to what it cost for boxers, because there was about a triple price difference. And so when I saw that the lady down the street had overgrown grass, I came home to Dad and I said, "Hey, can I borrow the lawnmower? I want to go see if lady down the street will let me cut her grass." And, my dad taught me amazing business. I owe so much to my father for what he taught me about business, because he said to me, he said, "Yeah, absolutely, you can do that." And he gave me some recommendations as far as like, okay, for a regular yard, charge $2, and for a cornered lot, charge $3 kind of thing. But then he also said, "You're using my mower, my gas, and those things. And so the way business works is you're going to pay me to use the mower." And so I had to pay him $1 for every lawn that I mowed. And then I got to keep the rest. And I quickly learned that I could give him $1 out of 3, or I could give him $1 out of 7, and quickly my prices went up. But I think it was a desire for independence, the desire to maybe purchase food that we wouldn't have had in the house. Again, living on a single income with 7 people in the house is you're not going to McDonald's. Let's say you're eating what you can afford on that type of a budget. So I think independence was a huge deal for me. And I also carry the natural firstborn tendencies of just wanting to dominate, I think. And I think that probably played a role as well.
Sure. Well, I think those are important details, right? For me, for you, it was your boxers, and that's fine, right? I was just fine with whitey tidies most of my life, and I still enjoy those types of underwear, so it's fine. But what's interesting is, for me, it was soccer, right? When I was 6 years old, and I did the same thing, started mowing lawns. But when I was 6 years old, I wanted to play soccer. And my mom told me the same thing. "Hey, if you want to play, that's totally fine. You're more than welcome to. But it costs $50 to get your jersey and your cleats and everything. You can go earn $50. And if you can earn $50 and you can arrange your rides, then you can go play," And it's like, okay, well, I guess that's what's required. And I did it. My brother did it. We did it together. And I think that those are the things. It's like, hey, I want something. Most people, I feel like, when they see that they want something, their question that they ask themselves is not, "How do I get it?" And I don't know why that is, that they aren't asking like, "Okay, that's what I want. How can I get that? What can I do in exchange for that?" They start asking, "Who's going to give it to me?" And they lean towards the entitlement rather than the initiative of growth. And so that's a key question that same question is going to play a role in the rest of your story as we go through it. But it's the same thing. It's like, what can I do to improve the situation, rather than what can somebody else do for me? Because the very nature of wondering what can somebody else do for me, or why doesn't somebody else do it, it's just a victim mentality inherently. And it's the hardest thing to root out, because it happens in so many areas of our lives that we don't even recognize it. And I'll go for it.
I was just going to say, my wife and I just celebrated a year of marriage, and we're not planning to have kids for another couple, but we've been talking about, what types of things we want to instill in our children. And what we've recognized is really very much what you said, both at the beginning of this conversation as well as just now. And I think there is a parallel between the 7-year-old that is still having their mom wipe their butt, as you said, right? And doing those things. And the 7-year-old that's told, "Okay, go achieve, go make it happen." And I think there's a lot of very well-meaning people, whether they're parents or in other positions of authority, that genuinely want to help. They're not trying to put people at a disadvantage. They genuinely want to help. And I'm sure you hear it just as much as I do. "I want to give my kids everything I never had." Not realizing that the fact that you didn't have them is why you were able to achieve them. And if you give them to somebody, they will never achieve what you've achieved, because they don't have that foundation of, if I'm going to get it, I need to make it. And those types of things. Obviously, I want to be successful. I want to have plenty of money in the bank. I don't want to be in a position like my parents were, where we can't afford to buy different kinds of underwear. And martial arts was the same way for me. When I wanted to do martial arts, I had to pay at least half of my classes. And so I resonate with that very much. But I still want to instill those values in our future children. And we've been talking about how do we do that? Because we're not going to use the excuse we can't afford it. No, we want to empower you to be self-sufficient. We want to give you the experience and the tools you need to go do something, because otherwise we're actually hamstringing you in your life. And I see a lot of 17 and 27-year-olds that are still thinking, who's going to give it to me, instead of how can I go create it?
Yeah. And I think the mentality, if it's not taught young, it's going to bleed into the rest of their life. And it's about, giving people the space to go and be empowered while not like force. I don't know that I want to force my kids, but I want them to have the space to do so, to grow and become entrepreneurs. So it's an interesting thing. But as that goes into martial arts, I want to kind of talk about this, because martial arts, from my understanding, and admittedly, I never really did martial arts. I don't know much about it other than I've watched other people do it. Never had a desire to get hit or hit anybody. It's just not something I enjoy, or standing in poses. I understand that there's a discipline aspect to it. From my knowledge of what I have studied of it, it seems as though there's a discipline aspect. And that's a large part of it, is the ethos of almost like the warriors type of way of being, hey, it's not that I am going to empower myself to dominate somebody, but it's about the inner confidence to know that I can protect myself and protect others. So, and that's a big emphasis on that, because when my son did karate and other people, there's a big emphasis on, hey, this is a self-defense, or this is a helping build you tool. It's not a weapon that we're arming you with to go and impose on others.
Yeah.
So in that, you're in there from 12 to 19 years old, essentially. And not only are you in it, you're teaching other people about this inner discipline, this inner focus, this inner integrity of knowing that you can do something without having to do it.
Yeah.
And that confidence. But at the same time of that, you mentioned that your character was no good. And when we talked in person, you had mentioned also that there was a level of, you had learned at a young age that lying was a survival strategy. So go into that a little bit, as well as like, why did that happen? Why was the lying a survival strategy? And how did that juxtapose what you were learning in martial arts? And how did you deal with that internally?
I have found an incredible ability in the human condition to justify things in a way that astounds one. If you just looking at one's own life, just like, wow, how in the world did I justify that? And you bring up an amazing point. I think that was one of the reasons why my actions let down so many people. Not only was I, an instructor for hundreds, and of course you had their parents and siblings and people that looked up to me. And so that the old adage, the higher you are, the further you fall, really played a critical role. But I was teaching the disciplines and the tenets of a martial artist, which include things like self-control. And yet I didn't. And so that juxtaposition is a fascinating one. And I think a lot of it is the ethos of the martial arts creed or code was crowded out by the ego of John being a superstar. I mentioned that I took to it very quickly, and I did. It was remarkable. In fact, until I moved to Arizona, I really didn't even have to try. I was just so much better than everyone else that was going. That's why I was asked to teach, even though I wasn't the highest rank and wasn't the oldest. And so that starts to feed or it did it for me anyways. It started to feed an aspect of me that, ooh, people like me. People give me accolades. I'm special. I'm the best. Coming to Arizona doused me with a bit of humility, because I went from being the top star in my little town to being kind of a nobody. But it didn't take me long to become a star here. And a little bit of effort is all it took for me to once again rise to the top, and everybody saying my name and everybody coming and talking to me. And so while I'm teaching things like humility and discipline, I am living a look at me, look how great I am, look how amazing it is. And not to blame anything or anybody else, but the American martial arts system makes that very easy. You have things like demo teams That's unheard of in the traditional martial arts. You don't have a demo team. You have a very inner sense of confidence that says, like you said, I can, but I don't unless I absolutely have to. Well, that's the opposite of the idea of a demo team that's out on the floor with everybody clapping and cheering and all of that that goes.
What is a demo team? Just like somebody who demonstrates and it's more for show. It's a performance type thing.
It's exactly what it is. So I would go to events and tournaments and schools and different things and do everything from breaking boards and bricks to doing choreographed patterns, which are essentially dances. They're called katas or forms in the martial arts. Weapons demonstrations, all sorts of stuff. And my name to claim was a couple of things. I broke boards with my head and cinder blocks with my hand, and then I did some pretty high jump spinning kick things. And that was kind of my part. But it was all about me, and identifying it was all about me. And so even when I committed my crime, I've told people and they think, wow, this is insane, John. It never once occurred to me that I could end up in prison. The only thing I ever thought about was, if somebody finds out, they're not going to like me. They're going to be mad at me. I was so self-absorbed. It was all about me. And so that is a huge thing. So everything from the businesses that I built so that I could have autonomy to the money that I raised so that I could buy what I wanted, to the control that I wielded, it was 100% about me. And the character flaw was ego. It was about me. And you asked about the line. Same thing. I realized very young, come from a very strict background, tell people what they want to hear. They like you. They agree. They let you do what you want to do. There was a moment in my life, I want to say I was 15 or 16 at this time. And there was a girl that attended the church that we went to, and I wanted to go have breakfast with her. It was a purely platonic experience. But this young lady had a child, and my parents did not want me to go to breakfast with her because they were concerned that somebody might see us together and assume that we'd had that child out of wedlock. And so it was like, are you serious? Like, there's no nefarious motives. We literally just wanted to go have breakfast. And so in that moment, I realized if I had told them I was going to have breakfast with this guy, there would have been no questions. It would have been just fine. And I could have done what I wanted. And I actually made a conscious decision at that moment, again, 15, 16 years old, that just tell people what they want to hear. Everyone's happier. I get to do what I want. They like what I'm doing. And that was a motto that I lived by for the next 3 to 4 years. And until I realized that there was a significant character issue with that line of thinking.
Sure. Yeah, that's, you're not wrong that it works short term, but long term, when the truth comes out, what people want to hear is not necessarily what they really want to hear. And I think that goes into a lot of areas, just like what you were talking about with your kids. When you do have them, how are you going to raise them? You're not going to say, I can't afford it, because that's not the truth. Although that might be a simple thing to say, we just don't want to do it. And then when somebody says, what do you mean you can't afford it? You have millions of dollars. Well, not money for that, right? You can justify a way saying you can't afford it, but a better way of saying it is just the truth. Hey, I want to teach you independent, self-discipline, self-productivity, entrepreneurship. And so if you want it, you're going to go earn it, because I want you to be well-adjusted and do that. Okay. Yeah. So sometimes we feel like we don't have to say all of that and we can just give a short answer, but sometimes the short answers are misinterpreted, intentionally so, sometimes, so.
And I've been accused of that, the opposite now. I'm so sensitive because I had a reputation. Once everything came crashing down, my reputation flipped, right? It went from being the best to being the worst. And so I'm now so sensitive to the idea that, hey, I don't want to ever give anyone the idea that they need to go, is John telling the truth on this? That I do. I'll over-explain just to say, hey, I want you to be able to take to the bank what I said, and that we have a clear understanding, and you never come back saying, but you said, hopefully, if I said it, you can bank on it, because that is very important. Not to me from a me perspective, but because I recognize that whether I've redeemed my past or not, there's still some level of atonement that has to be made from a PR perspective, because I was a liar. And the only way that a liar is able to no longer be a liar is to be a truth teller. And you can't even bend the truth in those scenarios.
Yeah, well, just to push back on that, not that you and I disagree on any level, right? I agree completely with you, with your approach and with your desire to do it. What I found due to society, because I approached things the same way when I was dating and trying to get married. It was like, hey, here's all my past, and I would just like dump it all out. Yeah. And
did the same.
Some people, many people actually, not just some, like a large percentage of people, they feel like if you over-explain, then that means you're lying, right? You've rehearsed your story so much that you're a liar because you've rehearsed it so much. And so it's like almost sometimes over-explaining has an adverse effect on you and on your relationships and on your credibility, which is a fascinating thing from that perspective. But also sometimes you end up sharing things that really are irrelevant, right? And over-explaining stuff is just it's not needed. So that's the second thing. The third thing is, unfortunately, we live in a world where we may think we are communicating clearly, explaining everything in very clear detail exactly, but because the words that I'm using mean something different to you who's listening, then you may be hearing something different than what I'm saying. And thus the communication is unclear. So you still think that I said something that I didn't, even though I expressly said what I felt and what I meant and what was true at my core. It doesn't always mean that we're clearly communicating. And that's a challenge all around. And I would just invite the audience, if you ever feel like somebody lied to you or you were miscommunicated to, I would go ahead and give them the benefit of the doubt most of the time. There's an occasional time where you're like, no, that guy definitely lied to me. Everybody knew it. But for the most part, I think if it's a semantical thing where you feel like there was a misinterpretation, give somebody the benefit of the doubt. I don't think that they're trying to lie. At least I found that I'm happier not assuming that the world's out to get me. I lived my life that way for a while. Now I just assume everybody's honest and they mean what they say. And that's burned me a few times. I'm not going to say it's never hurts the other way. Sometimes it hurts. But for the most part, I'm pretty grateful that I've lived that.
Yeah. I think it's always better to, I would rather give you the benefit of the doubt and get burned than assume that you're being nefarious and be wrong. And so I think that just from a human perspective, there are some people out there that will lie to you every chance they get, but it doesn't do anybody any good to live with that kind of victim mindset of who's out to get me. And I think it makes us paranoid and doesn't allow us to achieve our full potential. Sure.
So you can go into as much detail as you're willing to. Hopefully you're willing to go into enough here.
Sure.
But sometimes, because when you explained your story to me and what actually happened, like the play-by-play of when everything happened, I think that it's really easy. And in many cases, they might be able to justify, and you've mentioned this justification thing, but I want to dig into it a little bit deeper, where you might say you could play the story off as in you had a coming to conscious and you ran away so that you wouldn't be associated with what was happening. Yeah, you could have called the cops, which you didn't. But you could say, well, I was just frenzied, whatever, right? There's all these ways that you could explain what happened to yourself in the situation. So as much detail as you need to get that point across so the audience understands why that justification is crap and what that coming to understanding was, no, these were my choices and this is what I'm accountable for and this is what led to the whole thing.
Yeah, so I think there was multiple areas where I could make an excuse. I could make an excuse about broken promises from the company that was the owners of the building that was set on fire. I could make excuses about the impact of, my best friend who was 9 years older than the rest of us. I could make excuses about other members of the four of us who, kept the plane alive when it was kind of already dead. I could make excuses about getting sick to my stomach while sitting on the roof and not really wanting to go through with it. I can make excuses about running away before the fire was lit. But the reality is that I'm going to steal a line from Stephen Covey in his book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. In habit 1, he talks about being proactive, and he says that being proactive has nothing to do with not being reactive. It has everything to do with taking responsibility both for one's choices and their consequences. And it took me some years. It didn't all happen at once. I would love to say that day I felt bad. Nope. That day I thought I was in the right. The next day I thought, well, all I did physically was break a window. In the days after that, I thought, you know what, they're making these wild accusations. They're not accurate. They're saying I'm the mastermind. I was not. And I was, justifying it at all these different levels. And it took me, I want to say almost like 7 years to fully embrace the fact that just my presence there makes me culpable. I gave you the story, both in person and today, that suggests that I have natural leadership aptitude. I always end up in leadership positions, even if I didn't want to, or want them, or apply for them, or whatever. That's great. But it is very important to always remember that old adage, too much is given, much is required. And so the fact that I was even present as a natural born leader means that others were there because I was there. Now, if you read the media on it, they're going to tell you that I was the mastermind, that I manipulated others into joining. And I can say with a clean conscience, those are not true claims. But I can also acknowledge with authenticity that despite those being false claims, my presence there was impactful to the overall situation. And so while did I kill my best friend? No. But did my actions lead to his death? Yes. Did I light the fire? No. But was my presence there a contributing factor to that building being burned down? Yes. And so really just acknowledging not just what did I do? We get hung up on the details. Well, I didn't actually say that. You talked about like omitting details a minute ago, right? I didn't actually say that. No, but there was a detail purposefully omitted that was designed to let somebody believe whatever they wanted to believe. I got to take responsibility for that. Now, at that time in my life, I was just, saying whatever I wanted to say, and it was just bull-faced lies and outright dishonesty. But coming to that, and you talked at the beginning about the questions I ask, and so the questions I had to ask myself are: is there a difference? Is there a difference between whether I broke the window or whether I physically lit the match? Well, from a very metaphysical perspective, sure, right? Like the match is kind of important to the storyline. But again, I was there. I have to admit that if I had stood on that roof and instead of just getting sick to my stomach and not hitting the window very hard with my little plier things that I had, if I had stood up and said, guys, I'm leaving, the chances are really, really good that leadership thing would have kicked in and everyone else kind of would have went, all right, this doesn't sound very good. Do I know that would happen? No, I mean, I don't. But I didn't make the right decision to find out. And instead, I sat there and I was a coward and I lacked integrity and I lacked any form of discipline that I taught. And the results were catastrophic. And my best friend lost his life. And I ended up spending 12 years in the Department of Corrections. And one of the others spent 6 years in the Department of Corrections. And one of the others spent 3 years in the Department of Corrections. And so there was a huge loss. And it's easy to justify. It's easy to mitigate. It's easy to make excuses. But the reality is I made decisions I should not have made. And I would not be able to sit here today and claim that I have any form of leadership empowerment or ability to lead other leaders if I couldn't be very honest with myself about the things that I had to go through.
Yeah, and I completely agree. I think that principle applies everywhere in our lives, down to parenting, in like family members, everything. And even just remove everybody else from it, because it doesn't matter about other people as much as it matters about yourself.
Yeah.
You know what you're doing every day. You know the truth. You can't lie to yourself. You have to sleep with yourself. Like all of those things are true.
Yeah.
And because of that, it's really the best way to have peace in your life is to be honest and clear about what you're doing and not omit things from the truth. And it's the little lies that we tell ourselves. And I don't know that anybody that I know has completely stopped lying to themselves. And in fact, I think most of the successful people I know would say, tell yourselves lies every day, right? But the good ones, the ones that promote you to work harder, right? Things that you don't feel are true right now, or there's no physical evidence of their truth, you can still be telling yourself that those things are true about yourself to improve your life. They're called positive affirmations. But oftentimes we have delusional positive affirmations that say we're doing better than we actually are. So there's a big difference between recognizing where you're actually at and your honest truth versus other people's truths, or what you want other people to see.
Yeah. And I think for me, I have to be extra careful because of the reputation for being a dishonest person. I'm uniquely keen to that. And I know that I was listening to a podcast, a couple of days ago, and just, little warning bells went up because of my background and knowing how dishonest I was. But this person on the podcast, I think, was doing what you said, where they were in one side of their mouth talking about the success of their business and how they were so happy to be financially free and it was great. And then later in the podcast, they admitted that they were still working really, really, really hard to get a 6-month emergency fund. And to me, it was like, well, those are incompatible statements. Either you have a 6-month emergency fund and you're building and you have wealth, or you're just living paycheck to paycheck on a bigger scale. And so I think for her, she doesn't have a history of lying that I'm aware of. And so maybe somebody would look at that and go, oh, she's just on her journey. For me, in my business, I feel like there's a super fine line, and I can say things to myself like, hey, we're going to do this. But it's a big difference between we're going to do this and pretending like it's already done. Specifically because of my previous self-aggrandizement, it's important to me that I effectively and fairly represent who I am and what I'm doing and where the company is and things for people. And it's a tightrope sometimes of saying, hey, I don't want to speak negativity into my life. I refuse to acknowledge, I didn't fail. I just now know another way that doesn't work. But at the same time, not making it seem like I can't deal with my own failures. And so there's some growth there for me on every day as I try to balance what you said of those positive affirmations with also realistically looking and saying, wait a minute, am I convincing myself that I'm better than I actually am, which is a very short step away from justifying actions that, people like me if I say this. What's the difference between I'm going to lie to my parents so they'll like me and I'm going to misrepresent the status of the company so that the client buys from me? Very, very short, space in between those two, I think.
Yeah. I mean, it's a hard, we'll use the financially free context just for a second, because I think that for me, for a lot of my life, I thought financial freedom was a dollar number. Mm-hmm. And like maybe having a 6 months emergency fund or having a year or I don't know that that's what I would consider I don't see financial freedom that way anymore. So I'm not saying that this woman was in integrity saying what she was saying, but due to my new definition of the word, and this is where it comes down to like communication is key, and knowing how each person interprets what's being said. I think financial freedom and time freedom is getting to a point where you're in control over where you're putting your money rather than how much money do you have. Because I think you could be financially free, living at a higher income and not have savings. And you're making a choice to always be on the edge of financial freedom and maybe not be financially free versus somebody who has passive stream of income, enough money and investments that theoretically, they could never not have enough money. But the reality is anybody could go blow enough money. And so their choices every day everybody's only one day away from financial freedom or financial destitution, right? If you think of like Prince was a very wealthy person, had a lot of money. When he died, because he didn't have the proper structures in place, he didn't have the proper trusts, wills, insurances, everything, almost all of everything he had accumulated went to the government and taxes and stuff. It didn't go to his family because he didn't structure things properly. So he might have been very financially free, but that didn't translate. It was one day. of the wrong choice, right? So I think that there's a lot of definitions in that regard, but at any rate, I think that the principle of it's innate human. So I studied neuropsychology. So I got into the leadership game after I got into the psychology game. And what's fascinating about your brain is your brain's job, primary function, is to keep you from harm, keep you alive, and keep you away from harm. That's its objective. And with that objective, if we always thought negatively about ourselves, we would go insane. And so your brain's job is designed to reframe your reality in a self-empowering way. It's its job to. Now, sometimes it gets a little bit destroyed, I'm going to say, when you've had enough putting down and other people have abused you verbally, physically, mentally, emotionally, sexually, whatever, enough that they've degraded that. But what I found is even the people who are at the depths of their depression, even they are still making commitments saying, look, it's too painful to be here. It'd be less painful not to be here. Their brain is still creating scenarios in their mind where it's like, how do we minimize pain? How do we minimize suffering? Even if minimizing that suffering means taking our own life, it's still minimizing suffering. And that's your brain's job, is to minimize suffering. So then when we do have these experiences, when we are talking about our life, it is the natural tendency to say things and remember things in a way that makes you the hero. You are the hero of your life. Everybody else in your life, the movie of your life, is a supporting actor or actress. You are the main role. Every day, all day long, you sleep, you wake up, you eat, everything you're doing, you're the main role of your movie strip. And so your brain is always restructuring it that way. I have to do this with my wife all the time, where I'm saying like, well, this is the way I remember my childhood. This is the way I remember things, but I'm fully aware that like, I remember myself as a freaking god, right? I remember myself as service-oriented, loving, caring. Yeah, I was a jerk to people, but I did it like Thanos, out of love. You know, I did it out of protection. I was rude out of protection. I was rude out of, they need to know how harsh the world is. So I would rather be the harsh one than have them find somebody else who's harsh, right? Because I actually care about them, right? So, I mean, it's insane the things that you can tell yourself, but we always cast ourselves as the empowering role. And so it's really hard. I say hard, I think internally we know the truth, but sometimes I think internally we don't. Like internally we think, well, I am pretty good, you know? And it's like, well, let's look at the movie and we'll see who's good and who's not.
Yeah. And I think that for me was my biggest growth when I recognized that my way could not effectively position me as the hero in my story. And I kind of decided at a point in my life, like, all right, everything that I've been justifying for years now, well, that just came out. And there was no more secrets. Everything came out all at once. It's amazing how, like you said, we're one day away from financial independence or financial desolation. I was one day away from, integrity or lack thereof, and lack thereof was prominent. Everything came out, and in that space, I was able to say, maybe my movie narrative is not accurate. And that's why now I'm so passionate about servant-minded leadership, because I had to go through that, because I put myself in that situation. I've been able to say, okay, I can actually put somebody else first, but it was only because I got my biased narrative ripped to shreds. And there's the saying, as a neuroscientist, right? There really is that idea of rock bottom. People don't make dynamic changes unless they hit a substantial life event, and usually that is rock bottom. And my rock bottom was way down there. But it worked, and that was the biggest deal. So even in prison, right? Prison is a very dog eat dog world. It's very sink or swim, blah blah blah. So to go in, and I'll never forget when I was running one of the program departments, we had special I'll call them badges. They were little like name tag type things. that gave us access to the unit so that we could go into different classrooms and buildings and try to mentor and help people along their journey of rehabilitation. And I designed them myself, and I put on the back of that card, how can I serve you, for all of my team. I had, I think, 11 guys that all were walking around. And I got so much kickback from the team first. And I sold them on the vision that if you want to be a leader, you have to serve people. That is what a leader does. You can be a boss, you can be a manager, you can be all sorts of things and not serve anybody. But if you want to be a leader, and that's what you told me when you joined the team, you have to want to serve. But then you get kickback from the other people. What does that mean? Who do you think you are, or what is, and they'll start making innuendo comments and all sorts of different things. And so to be able to go into that environment and say, no, preservation, that's what the brain does. No, I'm going to specifically position myself to be different from that which is expected. I don't think that ever would have happened in the previous version of my life. I never would have positioned myself to be looked down upon, to be mocked, to be, talked behind my back because, how can I serve you? This is prison. Don't you know where you are? And there's a saying, it's a biblical saying. I hope it's not out of place to say it, but there would be there's often a saying you hear, when in Rome, do as the Romans. And I would always counter that with when in Rome, do like Paul being a character in the Bible who almost single-handedly changed Rome from the inside out. And, just be the difference maker. I put a post on LinkedIn a couple of days ago about my incarceration and how I learned that one person could ruin a dorm, but one person could also redeem a dorm. And I just committed to being that person. But that never would have happened if I hadn't just had the rug absolutely pulled out from under me.
Yeah. And we all need those experiences that completely shift our perspective and help us come to Jesus, metaphorically or physically, and really get to the point of understanding. So one other thing I wanted to share here is, before we wrap up, but the difference, you can have good leadership skill and be a natural born leader. And that doesn't always mean you're a good person. And leading, like I'm going to use names, right? But Hitler was a great leader, phenomenal at leading. Not good things, but he was great at leading, Jesus Christ was a great leader. Many would say he led people to do great things. Some people disagree. Muhammad, he was a great leader. Many people still follow him, right? There's still that. There's Buddha. There's all these different people. You can be great leaders. And then there's leaders politically that they're great leaders, but they're not the best humans. And sometimes we choose to follow the leadership over the human. Yeah. And I don't know that it's good or bad. I think that it's an internal choice for everybody. But I do think that it's important to understand what you're following, why you're following that person, and why you're either choosing to or not to replicate that person, because those leaders are designing the way that they're leading to get followers. And followers are disciples or people that are being taught or trained to become like them.
Yeah.
And even if you think, I'm just going to follow somebody, but I'm not going to become like them, it's unlikely.
You bring up an amazing thought, and I love the fact that you're bringing this up, because what we're really talking about is the difference between effective leadership and charisma, right? There are so many people with charisma that make people want to follow them, and if you have followers, then by definition you are a leader. And you're right. There's tons of them that have no character, and people are just attracted. They're magnetized to their charisma. And that's what I've always had, right? I've always had that, but that didn't make me an effective leader. You hear about servant leaderhood, and I think that says, hey, let's fix the character. But, and this is totally nuanced and it's totally semantical, so I'm not in any way building, a foundation of dying on this hill, but I specifically added a word in my leadership theory or principle. And I added the word minded, servant-minded leadership, and that's why the business is called SML Consultative, because it's possible, in my opinion, to pretend like you're a servant. You do things for people and it becomes a lie. It becomes this idea of if I do X, I get Y, and it becomes transactional, which is not actual servanthood or servitude. It's transactional, and it's all manipulation. All right, if I can do this for this person, then I know that they're going to have to do that, or they're going to feel like they have to do that, and that's the opposite. And so I added this word minded, servant minded, because then it says, I can't get control what anybody else does. I can't control how anybody else takes it. They can look at that. How can I serve you? And they can say, you're so uppity, or you're stupid. You're in prison. Why would you say that? Can't control that. But what I can control is how I'm going to perceive every situation as an opportunity to add value, to make something happen instead of expect it to be given to me. And so what you're describing, man, we see it all the time, don't we? We have these people that people are following, and we're just like, what are you doing? Like, why? What do you see? It's the magnetism of the charisma, but it's not an authentic leadership capacity. And while I was charismatic, I was not a leader. Hopefully now I can say that I'm a genuine leader, a good person leader that's actually desiring to help people. And maybe even to my own expense. Right?
Yeah, sure. And the final point I'll add here is, and this is true for everybody. So if you're sitting there thinking you're past redeemability, or that you're still embarrassed by your deep, dark secret that you're hiding from the world, the reality in my mind is that your biggest liability, the thing that you think is the biggest liability in your life is actually the largest asset, right? John could have gone to prison and stayed there literally for the rest of his life, or got out and returned, and got out and returned, and got out and returned, and got out and returned, stayed in for the rest of his life. Or he could have a comeback story. He could come and say, look, I overcame all of that. It's a different person. This is another crazy thing. You said you were in there for 12 years.
Yeah.
Okay. So the depending on which research you read, the oldest cell in your body is in your femur bone, and it's about 15 years old, which means literally, in every sense of the word, John is a completely new person, completely regenerated person.
I love that.
Different than who he was when he went in.
Yeah.
From every fiber of his being, it's shed, it's grown, everything is different. Your cells have completely rejuvenated themselves over that time period. If you're still hanging on to extra weight, extra guilt, extra anything in your life, and it's been multiple years, you've chose to recreate that into your present.
Yes.
That's a choice to recreate it, because if you chose to not recreate it, it would separate from you, because it only gets recreated if you allow it to. So he's a completely new person. That's a whole nother life ago. When I think about my childhood and all the things that I did, and I say I did, I actually didn't do those things. I mean, I make mistakes today still, right? I'm not perfect. But when I think of the stuff, it's literally like, man, who was that person? I would not recognize that person if I saw them in the street, because they're just such night and day different people. And they're actually different people, not hypothetically, not theoretically. Yeah. From the actual science of it, they're different people. Yeah. And it's important to recognize that you could be a different person if you want to be, or you can continue to instruct your body to recreate all the same crap it's been recreating every day and every month.
The power of choice that we have is absolutely incredible. I had the privilege of well, I don't know if it was a privilege, but the advantage of watching another 19-year-old arrived at the same unit I was on about a week after I did. And from the get-go started making different choices. And I'm not here to speak bad about that individual, but those choices impacted his experience in prison. And I can tell you that his experience was very different, and his story to date is very, very different. So the power of choice is remarkable. But man, you talked about redemption. There is no such thing as an unredeemable person, in my opinion anyways, because like you said, we can make different choices, and you can't change yesterday's choice. I cannot unlight that fire that Josh lit. I can't unkill Josh. All I can do is make a good choice today. And so can every person listening to this podcast.
Awesome. Well, hey, thank you so much for sharing your story, sharing your principles of leadership that you've learned. I think they're absolutely essential and impactful. And if we can all adopt them into our life, we're all going to be happier and more servant-minded leaders in our lives. And it's going to make the world a better place. So thank you so much. And we'll catch you guys next time on the Fuel Your Legacy Show. Thanks for joining us. If what you heard today resonates with you, please like, comment, and share on social media. Tag me. And if you do give me a shout out, I'll give you a shout out on the next episode. Thanks to all of those who've left a review. It helps spread the message of what it takes to build a legacy that lasts. And we'll catch you next time on Fuel Your Legacy.